Something very important about this text is how it shows us the centrality of testimony in a church being led by the Spirit. Look here at verse 12. The whole assembly kept silence and listened to Barnabas and Paul as they told of all the signs and wonders that God had done through them among the Gentiles. This is a very critical moment in which the church was beginning to sense the urgency of the Spirit in moving them, their Jewish bodies and Gentile bodies together into one community. Now, I wanted to help you notice a few things in this text about testimony and how it operates in this movement of the Spirit doing new things among the church. This is not just about a privatized, individualized spiritual experience, as we often think about testimony today, people sharing about something secretly done in their own hearts. But this was actually a testimony shared within the context of community, a really vital part of what testimony is about in a church, shared within community. And it wasn't just accepted at an unexamined face value, as if it had meaning and significance all by itself. It was put through a process of discernment in the community where this testimony of Paul and Barnabas was put into conversation with others in that faithful community who had testified about what they were experiencing. For example, the testimony of Peter up in verse 7 of this same passage. After there had been much debate, Peter stood up and said to them, "My brothers, you know in the early days God made choices among you, etc., etc." And Peter had shared testimony throughout this book so far about his leadings and visions and the cosmic sheet being brought down and lifted back up again. And the community put Paul and Barnabas' testimony into conversation with others that they had heard, giving testimony about the very same movements of the Spirit. And they understood the communal context of what this testimony was pointing to. And then, really significantly here, it was not a testimony of one individual divorced from the historic faith tradition, but the newness that the testimony pointed to was put into context with the words of the prophets of old. Right down here in verse 15, this agrees with what the words of the prophets said there. And then those words were written. After this, I will return and I will rebuild the dwelling of David, etc., etc. So the testimony shared in the context of experience, placed into conversation with the testimony of others who were experiencing the same newness of the Spirit's movement among them, and then read within the context of the entirety of the faith tradition, heard in resonance with the words of the prophets of old. I want to share this passage that Willie Jennings has here about this particular testimony. He's talking about Peter's testimony in verse 7. Willie Jennings says, "Only when Peter recalled where the Spirit of God had led him into the lives of those he did not want to know did this group see the way forward." The way forward was found in testimony, in truth embodied in the flesh. To reiterate, only when Peter shared with them where the Spirit of God had led him into the lives of those he did not want to know did the group see the way forward. This is the power of testimony for a church being led into newness by the Spirit of God. So I invite you this morning as you read this passage and contemplate its meaning for you to think through your own elements of testimony, how you have sensed the Spirit of God moving in your life as a whole, but also in particular in your life in these past few weeks, as we have been discerning the Spirit's movement among us into the newness of this moment we are living through together. What is that element of your testimony that could be shared in community, put into the context of others' testimony about the Spirit's movement, and then read in the resonance of that testimony's relationship to the words of the faith tradition from of old.